there stands a woman in the quiet corner of the world. Her hands are folded, her eyes unblinking, her silence louder than any crowd. She has walked through the noise and found no comfort in it. She has sat among laughter and felt the chill of distance. Yet she does not crumble. She does not break. She is a woman with no friends, and yet she is not alone. She has been called many things: strange, cold, distant. She has been mistaken for proud, when she was only protecting the little softness left within her. People have spoken her name with misunderstanding, not knowing that solitude is her sanctuary, not her sentence. A woman with no friends is a woman who has met the world and found it wanting. She has poured her kindness into the wrong cups, watched it spill over ungrateful hands, and learned at last to drink from her own. She has heard promises spoken in sugar and lies whispered in honey, and she has chosen, finally, to listen to her own truth instead. She walks without company, yet her steps are full of grace. Because when the world turns its back, she finds the warmth in her own soul. When the doors close, she remembers that she carries a key no one else can use. A woman with no friends has known betrayal. She has known the smile that hides envy, the compliment that drips with poison, the invitation that ends with humiliation. She has seen love turn shallow and loyalty disappear with convenience. And so she chose the company of peace over the performance of friendship. Do not pity her. Do not imagine her life as small. For a woman who walks alone walks closer to herself. She hears the songs no one else hears. She dances to rhythms that rise from her marrow. She prays without witnesses, and her prayers move mountains unseen. There are those who think friendship defines a life. They think connection must always come with noise, with gatherings, with endless words. But there is a sacred kind of connection that needs no name, no phone calls, no meetings. A connection between a woman and her spirit, a dialogue between her breath and her purpose. A woman with no friends is a woman who listens to the world through her own heartbeat. She does not need validation, for she has met truth in solitude. She has discovered that loneliness and peace are not twins. They are opposites, often mistaken for one another. She has chosen peace. There were days she longed for companionship. Days when silence felt heavy, when the evening shadows sat too close. She would reach out, and her hand would meet air. She would speak, and her words would echo back unanswered. And yet, in those moments, she learned that her own voice was enough. That her story, though unheard, was still sacred. The woman with no friends becomes her own confidant. She becomes her own healer. She looks at the moon and whispers her secrets. Not because she expects an answer, but because the moon listens without judgment. She looks at her reflection and says, "You are still here," and that is enough. She remembers the times she laughed too loudly to hide her pain, smiled too brightly to seem acceptable, agreed too quickly to avoid rejection. She remembers shrinking herself to fit the comfort of others, only to realize that comfort built her cage. So she stopped performing. She stopped pretending. She stopped asking to be understood by those who were not meant to understand her. Now, when she walks, the ground knows her rhythm. The wind moves aside, not out of fear, but respect. She carries no entourage, no audience, no applause. And yet she carries the universe in her chest. A woman with no friends knows that silence is not emptiness. Silence is strength waiting to be heard. In silence, she builds. In silence, she forgives. In silence, she finds herself again. She remembers the women before her. Those who were too strong, too honest, too different to be embraced by the crowd. She remembers how they stood at the edge of society, crafting light out of exile. She feels their courage in her veins. She is the echo of their defiance and the continuation of their grace. A woman with no friends knows how to sit with herself. And that, my dear, is a divine education. She does not rush to fill the space with noise. She does not beg for attention to drown her truth. She knows that the quiet teaches her more than conversation ever could. She has found that the world is quick to celebrate women who belong, but slow to understand women who don't need to. The woman with no friends does not fit into the molds made for comfort. She is not built to be convenient. She is built to be whole. In her solitude, she writes her own scripture. It is not written in ink but in action, in how she endures, how she creates, how she refuses to disappear. She does not need witnesses to validate her worth. She was born valuable, and her worth remains untouched, even in the absence of others. When people ask, "Where are your friends?" she smiles, because they do not know that she walks with ancestors, with memory, with purpose. They do not know that every step she takes is accompanied by invisible strength, the kind that cannot be photographed, cannot be tagged, cannot be measured by social gatherings. A woman with no friends is not a woman without love. She is a woman who has learned to love differently. She loves the sunrise that meets her before the world awakes. She loves the book that speaks to her when no one else will. She loves the stillness that holds her without expectation. Her love is not loud, but it is deep. It is not shared by many, but it is enough to sustain her soul. She has learned that love need not always be exchanged. Sometimes it is simply lived. And yes, there are moments when she aches, when she wishes for the warmth of another heart close by. But even in that ache, she discovers a beauty. Because the ache reminds her she is alive, open, feeling, not hardened by the world's neglect, but still tender enough to hope. The woman with no friends builds her empire from within. She becomes her own mentor, her own muse, her own masterpiece. She studies her scars like scriptures and learns that every wound was a lesson in disguise. She does not curse the past. She thanks it for shaping her resilience. She learns that solitude sharpens vision. While others are distracted by chatter, she sees clearly. She sees who she is, where she must go, and what she must no longer tolerate. She understands that true friendship, when it comes, will not demand her silence, her smallness, or her sacrifice. It will meet her as she is, whole, fierce, and unafraid. And until that friendship appears, she is content to walk alone, for she has found the rarest companion of all, her own soul. There is a sacred rebellion in being a woman with no friends. The world teaches women to be agreeable, to be surrounded, to be chosen. But this woman chooses herself. She does not wait for an invitation to her own life. She has built the table, set the seat, and poured the wine. When others gather in crowds, she gathers her strength. When they chase validation, she cultivates wisdom. When they fear being unseen, she learns the art of disappearing into peace. A woman with no friends becomes a mirror to the world, showing others what it means to belong to oneself. She becomes a lesson others whisper about, but do not yet understand, because freedom in its purest form frightens those who have never tasted it. She carries the calm of storms that have already passed. She speaks with the authority of one who has survived misunderstanding and come out shining. Her solitude is not her punishment. It is her reward. It is where she became who she was meant to be. And so, when you see a woman walking alone, do not mistake her quiet for sadness. Do not confuse her distance for bitterness. You are looking at a woman who has mastered her own company, who has learned that not all light needs an audience to shine. She does not beg to be seen, yet she is unforgettable. She does not strive to be heard, yet her silence resounds. A woman with no friends has learned that connection without authenticity is poison, that attention without care is emptiness. She has chosen to fill her own cup rather than sip from another's illusion. She knows that peace is more precious than popularity, that self-respect is better than belonging, that truth, once found, is worth more than 1,000 shallow smiles. And in that knowing, she stands tall, not because she has company, but because she has character. Not because she is surrounded, but because she is sustained. She is not the lonely woman. She is the luminous one. The woman who dared to face herself without flinching, who met her solitude and called it sacred. She is the echo of every woman who chose peace over pretense, growth over gossip, purpose over presence. She is not against the world. She is simply beyond its noise. So when the day ends and the lights dim, she sits by her window, watching the stars bloom like old friends across the sky. She smiles softly, knowing that she, too, is one of them, shining, separate, yet infinite. A woman with no friends is a woman who has finally befriended her own soul. And there is no greater companionship than that. The strength of solitude reveals the depth of a woman's soul. When the world grows too loud, when voices around her twist her truth into something small and unrecognizable, she retreats into the quiet. In that silence, she begins to see herself not as others define her, but as she truly is, alone. She begins to understand that solitude is not a wound to be healed, but a mirror to be gazed into. It is where she finds her essence stripped of expectation, where she hears the pulse of her own heart louder than any praise or rejection. The strength that comes from solitude is not born from defiance, but from discovery. It is a gentle power, one that does not announce itself with noise, but with clarity. A woman who stands alone learns that peace cannot be borrowed. It must be built within the walls of her being. She learns that her worth is not measured by the number of hands that reach for her, but by the steadiness of her own. The quiet hours that once frightened her become sacred ground. Each breath she takes in stillness becomes a hymn of resilience. She learns to sit with herself, not out of punishment but out of reverence. There she faces her fears, her memories, her unmet dreams, and she greets them with courage. In solitude, she does not crumble under the weight of absence. She rises under the presence of truth. The world often tells her that to be alone is to be unloved, that company is proof of value, and that silence must be filled. But she begins to see the lie in that teaching. She recognizes that connection without authenticity is emptiness wearing a disguise. She learns to prefer the clean ache of solitude over the clutter of false affection. The strength of her solitude becomes her shelter. It is where she rebuilds after the storms, where she forgives without witnesses, where she dreams without limits. She understands that solitude is not isolation when it is chosen with intention. It becomes communion with one's highest self. There is a depth in her now that the world cannot easily disturb. She carries stillness like armor and tenderness like fire. Her solitude does not harden her, it refines her. It teaches her to listen. To her intuition, to her breath, to the soft voice of the divine that speaks only in quiet spaces. And when she walks back into the world, she carries that stillness with her, invisible yet powerful. People sense it. They see it in her eyes. A calm that cannot be imitated, a confidence that cannot be explained, only felt. The strength of her solitude becomes her silent crown, a light that does not flicker. Even when the world goes dark, isolation becomes sacred when it teaches self-trust. There is a moment in every woman's life when the noise fades, and she realizes that no one else can walk her path for her. It is in that moment, surrounded by silence, that she begins to hear the whispers of her own intuition. At first, the quiet feels heavy, like a weight pressing on her chest. The absence of familiar voices unnerves her, for she was raised to believe that safety comes from belonging. But soon, she discovers that there is a different kind of belonging. One that comes from within, one that no betrayal can touch. In the stillness, she learns to trust the rhythm of her own thoughts, the sound of her own reasoning, the pull of her own spirit. Isolation becomes her teacher. It strips away every illusion of dependence, every borrowed opinion, every shallow validation that once guided her steps. She learns to make decisions not from fear of being alone, but from faith in her own wisdom. Every time she listens to herself and is proven right, her faith grows stronger. Every time she falters and rises again, her confidence deepens. She begins to understand that the voice within her is not her enemy, but her oldest friend. The lessons that isolation offers are never easy, but they are always honest. They reveal what she truly needs, not what she has been told to desire. In isolation, she meets her own shadow and learns not to fear it. She learns to sit with discomfort and find meaning in it. She learns that silence is not the absence of love, but the presence of truth. As she navigates her solitude, she discovers that she can stand firm without applause, that she can hold her own hand and feel complete. The world may not understand it, for it measures worth by visibility and validation. But she begins to live by a quieter measure, the peace that comes when one's heart and actions are aligned. When she trusts herself, her spirit grows unshakable. No voice, no judgment, no rejection can undo what she has built in private. She no longer seeks permission to believe in her choices. She no longer bends to fit into spaces too small for her truth. Her isolation, once seen as emptiness, becomes sacred ground. It becomes the temple where she meets herself without mask or performance. There she learns that faith is not always about gods or heavens. Sometimes it is about believing that your own soul knows the way, even when your eyes cannot see it. She becomes guided by an inner compass that no storm can break, a quiet certainty that she carries wherever she goes, like a hidden flame that keeps her warm when the world grows cold. Peace is the reward of a woman who stops seeking permission to exist. There comes a time when she grows tired of explaining herself, of softening her edges to make others comfortable, of dimming her light to keep their shadows calm. She realizes that every apology she gave for simply being herself was a small surrender, a theft of her own freedom. And so she begins to unlearn the art of pleasing. She stops asking if her dreams are too big, if her silence is too loud, if her truth is too much. In the stillness of her heart, she discovers that peace is not found in approval, but in authenticity. She remembers the countless times she tried to fit into rooms that could not hold her, to wear smiles that were not hers, to agree with words that bruised her spirit. Each time she silenced her voice, she felt herself grow smaller, unseen, unheard. But peace cannot bloom in pretense. It comes only when a woman gives herself permission to be whole. When she looks in the mirror and no longer seeks validation in the reflection. When she speaks not to be accepted, but to be honest. When she walks not to impress, but to be free. As she stops seeking permission, a quiet revolution begins within her. The noise of the world fades, and her heartbeat becomes her only guide. She stops waiting for others to confirm her worth, for their silence or disapproval no longer defines her. She learns that peace does not come when everyone finally understands her. It comes when she no longer needs them to. There is a power in that detachment, a serenity that only truth can offer. She moves through life with a calm that confuses those who once controlled her with their opinions. She no longer measures her life by comparison, no longer chases belonging at the cost of her soul. She understands that some will misunderstand her peace, mistake it for pride, or call it indifference. But she has learned that peace often looks like distance to those who thrive on chaos. She has chosen to guard her spirit, to tend to her inner world like a sacred garden. In that garden she waters her joy, prunes her pain, and allows her growth to be unseen yet unstoppable. Every boundary she sets becomes a prayer for self-respect. Every silence she chooses becomes a declaration of freedom. She stops explaining why she values her rest, why she walks away from noise, why she prefers solitude to shallow company. For she knows now that peace is not found in being liked, but in being aligned with her truth, her purpose, her breath. It is the quiet after the storm, the exhale after years of holding her breath. The gentle certainty that she no longer needs to earn the right to simply exist. True friendship begins when a woman befriends her own spirit, Before she can open her heart to another, she must first learn the language of her own soul. It is not an easy task. For most of her life, she has been taught to look outward, to seek approval, to chase love, to find completion in the eyes of others. She has been told that loneliness is something to fear, that being alone means being unworthy. But when the noise fades and the world grows distant, she begins to meet the woman within, the one who has always been waiting for her, patient and quiet. This meeting is not dramatic, but it is divine. It happens in the still moments, in the pauses between breaths, in the tender acceptance of her flaws. She begins to listen to herself differently. The inner critic that once ruled her softens into understanding. The harsh voice that echoed the world's judgment begins to lose its power. In its place grows a whisper, steady, loving, true. She realizes that she has spent years trying to be loved by others while neglecting the love that waited inside her. Now, she begins to offer herself kindness without condition. She forgives her younger self for not knowing better. She thanks her present self for surviving. She looks at her reflection not to find faults, but to see the spirit that has carried her through everything she thought would break her. As she befriends her own spirit, she begins to understand what true friendship means. It is not flattery or convenience. It is truth, loyalty, and presence. It is the willingness to stand with oneself in both failure and victory, in both chaos and calm. She learns to sit in her sadness without shame and celebrate her joy without guilt. She learns that to be her own friend is to never abandon herself again. Not for love, not for belonging, not for acceptance. In this friendship with herself, she begins to feel lighter. Her laughter becomes more genuine, her silence more peaceful. She no longer hides parts of herself to be palatable. She no longer performs for connection. Instead, she becomes a safe space for her own truth. And from that safety, she draws strength. When she finally meets others, she no longer clings to them for validation. She meets them from a place of wholeness, not hunger. Her love becomes freer, her boundaries firmer, her peace unshakable. Those who come into her life now meet a woman rooted in herself. She does not chase, she attracts. She does not beg, she invites. She does not fear being left because she has already learned how to stay. This friendship with her own spirit becomes the foundation for everything else she builds. Her relationships, her dreams, her faith. For the woman who has befriended her own soul will never again be truly alone. Solitude refines, not weakens, the fire within her. When the world retreats and the noise fades, she is left with herself, her thoughts, her fears, her dreams, her unspoken prayers. At first, the quiet feels heavy, almost unbearable, like standing in a room filled with echoes of everything she once tried to forget. But slowly, as the silence stretches, she begins to hear the faint hum of her own spirit. She starts to understand that solitude is not an enemy, but a sculptor chiseling away everything false until only truth remains. It burns away the illusions she once clung to. The need to be seen, the need to be understood, the need to be constantly surrounded. In the quiet, she learns what is real. She learns that her fire does not depend on the wind of others' attention to keep burning. In solitude, she rediscovers her strength. She faces the parts of herself she once ran from and realizes that they are not monsters, but messengers. Each shadow reveals a lesson, each memory a thread that leads her closer to her essence. The time spent alone becomes sacred, not empty. It becomes the ground where her inner flame grows purer. She begins to move differently, slower, more intentional, more aware. Her fire, once wild and seeking, becomes steady and self-sustaining. The chaos that once fueled her now gives way to calm, and from that calm emerges power that cannot be imitated. She learns that refinement is not about perfection, but about truth. The woman who has sat in silence with herself knows what she stands for. She no longer confuses noise for meaning or attention for love. She no longer fears being misunderstood, for solitude has taught her that understanding begins within. Her fire no longer seeks permission to burn. It no longer dims itself to keep others comfortable. Instead, it glows quietly, radiating warmth that others can feel even when she speaks no words. Solitude teaches her patience. It teaches her how to wait without losing faith, how to rebuild without bitterness, how to glow without demanding to be seen. It shows her that her energy is precious, her focus sacred. When she emerges from her solitude, she carries with her a stillness that others mistake for mystery. But it is not mystery, it is mastery. The mastery of self, of emotion, of purpose. She walks differently because she has walked through her own silence and found strength there. Her solitude becomes a sanctuary she can return to whenever the world grows too loud, a place where her fire can breathe freely, unjudged and uncontained. That fire, once flickering in uncertainty, now burns with direction. It does not rage, it illuminates. It does not consume, it creates. And though no one else may see the process, solitude has refined her into something unshakable, something luminous, something eternal. A woman without friends often walks alone, but never walks empty. The world sees her solitude and imagines a void, a hollow space where companionship should live. But what they cannot see is the fullness within her. Her footsteps echo not with absence but with purpose. Every time she walks through the world without an audience, she carries her history, her resilience, and her quiet triumphs beside her. She has learned that company does not always equal connection, and silence is not always loneliness. There is a kind of richness that only solitude can give, a fullness that comes when she no longer waits to be chosen to feel worthy. When she moves through crowded places, she feels the rhythm of her own heartbeat as a compass. She no longer searches faces for belonging, for she has already found it within her own soul. She carries memories of all she has endured, the betrayals that taught her discernment, the disappointments that carved wisdom into her heart, the nights she wept herself back into strength. Those experiences are not emptiness but weight, sacred weight, the kind that grounds her and keeps her from drifting into need. Her walk may appear quiet, but each step speaks of endurance, of stories untold, of strength refined by solitude. She has learned that life will not always offer her the comfort of shoulders or hands to hold, but it will always offer her the strength to stand. The woman without friends does not pity herself, though others might. She knows that pity is a small gift compared to self-understanding. She knows that the absence of company is not the absence of worth. Her solitude has become her teacher, her mirror, her altar. It is where she lays down her fears and picks up her courage again. When she sits alone, she does not count who is missing. She counts what she has gained. The stillness around her becomes a symphony of lessons. She begins to hear what others miss, the faint whisper of intuition, the soft hum of gratitude, the steady beat of life unfolding exactly as it should. She no longer rushes to fill the silence with conversation. She lets it stretch and breathe until it feels like home. That home, though invisible to others, is the safest place she has ever known. It holds her truth, her calm, and her grace. The woman without friends learns to observe people differently. She watches how they rush to surround themselves with noise, how they chase constant validation to avoid meeting their own reflections. She understands it because she once did the same. But solitude has stripped away her illusions. It has taught her that being alone is not a punishment, it is an invitation. It is an open door to a deeper self, a place where she can listen without interruption to the quiet wisdom that lives inside her bones. There are days, of course, when she feels the ache of absence. Days when she wishes for laughter that is not her own, for a voice answering her words. But even in those moments, she recognizes the difference between longing and lack. Longing means she still feels, she still hopes. She still has space for love when it is true. Lack means she is incomplete, and she is not. Her heart beats with wholeness. Even when her surroundings are still, she has learned to honor her feelings without letting them define her. The ache visits but does not stay. It reminds her that she is human, not broken. She carries within her the companionship of her own growth. The woman she was and the woman she is becoming walk side by side, sometimes arguing, sometimes laughing, always learning. She no longer measures her worth by proximity but by peace. Her success is not how many people stand beside her, but how deeply she can stand with herself. The world may praise community, but she has discovered the sacred power of communion. The communion between spirit and strength, between breath and purpose. She has also learned compassion in solitude. Because she has walked through her own silence, she knows how to sit with the silence of others. She knows how to listen without fixing, how to understand without judgment. Her empathy runs deeper now, because it was carved through her own loneliness. She knows the difference between sympathy that pities and compassion that uplifts. When she does encounter others, her presence is gentle yet grounding, for she brings with her the calm of one who has faced herself and survived. Her solitude has also sharpened her clarity. She sees people as they are, not as she hopes they will be. She no longer chases potential, she honors reality. The woman without friends has been betrayed enough times to understand that not everyone who smiles means well. She does not hate for it, she simply accepts it. Her trust now belongs first to herself. She does not build walls. She builds boundaries, the kind that keep her peace intact while still allowing love to enter if it is true. When she looks back at the roads she has walked alone, she no longer feels bitterness. Those paths, though lonely, were her initiation into strength. They taught her endurance, discernment, faith. They shaped her into someone who does not crumble under solitude but grows from it. She learned that not every season needs witnesses. Some seasons demand quiet growth, roots deepening unseen beneath the surface. That kind of growth cannot happen in noise. It needs the hush of isolation to take shape. She has become her own source of joy. She finds beauty in small moments. The warmth of morning light through her window, the taste of tea she brews for herself, the peace that settles in her chest after a long day. These moments do not depend on others. They belong entirely to her. They are proof that fulfillment is not given. It is cultivated. The woman without friends no longer waits for celebration. She becomes her own reason to rejoice. And when she does encounter friendship, she recognizes it not by how it fills her time, but by how it respects her space. She is no longer impressed by presence. She is moved by authenticity. She values the rare souls who meet her without expectation, who honor the strength she built in solitude rather than fearing it. Because she has walked alone, she can stand beside others without losing herself. The woman without friends often carries an energy that feels like mystery. But it is not mystery. It is peace disguised as distance. She does not explain herself anymore. She no longer tries to convince the world that she is content. Those who see her stillness may misunderstand it. But she smiles quietly because she knows what they do not. That fullness is not measured by noise, and love is not always loud. Each morning when she rises, she carries unseen companions. The lessons of her solitude, the whispers of her intuition, the soft resilience of her own heart. They walk with her, invisible but present, reminding her that emptiness is an illusion. She moves through life like a river, sometimes silent, sometimes fierce, always flowing. She has become both her own shelter and her own light. Her journey is not one of loneliness, but of reclamation. She has reclaimed her voice, her rhythm, her peace. She no longer fears the quiet nights or the empty chairs. For she has learned that she is not walking alone. She is walking with everything she has survived, everything she has become, and everything she is still meant to be